Tiffany Henyard made headlines when the FBI handcuffed her amidst allegations of wire fraud, accusing her of financing a lavish lifestyle at the expense of Dalton's finances. At first glance, the situation seemed absurd, like a small-town scandal blown out of proportion. But as the investigation deepened, it became clear this was far from typical. Once seen as the rising star of Dalton, Henyard indulged in luxury getaways, designer luggage, and an over-the-top security detail that likely cost more than most residents' homes. Meanwhile, the town's bank account drained rapidly, debt piled up, and her personal wealth flourished. What should have been a stable financial future for Dalton turned into a financial disaster. The FBI took notice, and now Henyard has a lot to answer for. Her rise to power began after the sudden passing of Frank Zucchi left an unexpected vacancy in the mayor's office. Sworn in under last-minute circumstances, Henyard initially captivated residents with bold promises of progress. For a brief moment, it seemed she might be the fresh leadership Dalton needed. But the honeymoon phase didn't last. As soon as public money became involved, red flags emerged. It wasn't just excessive spending, it was reckless squandering. Town funds dwindled at an alarming rate, while Henyard acted less like a responsible public official and more like a ruler of her own personal kingdom. Anyone who dared to question her decisions was silenced. The village board attempted to intervene, raising concerns over financial mismanagement, but Henyard refused to be challenged. She overrode every attempt to rein her in, treating the town's money as her personal ATM. Despite mounting debt and growing public scrutiny, she continued to flaunt her extravagant lifestyle. Expensive vacations, designer wardrobes, and a security detail that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Confident she could outmaneuver her critics, she ignored the warnings and pressed on. But she had underestimated just how closely the FBI was watching. As agents peeled back the layers of financial misconduct, the full scope of Henyard's alleged fraud came to light. What began as whispers of corruption had exploded into a full-blown criminal investigation, one that could end not just her political career, but her freedom as well. What began as a promising leadership story for a small town quickly spiraled into a nightmare of corruption, greed, and betrayal. Once viewed as a celebrity-like figure in Dalton, Tiffany Henyard had become the face of political scandal. Now, as the FBI closed in, the town's residents were left grappling with the fallout of her actions. Henyard faced serious questions about how she had mismanaged Dalton's funds and whether her extravagant lifestyle had been funded by the very community she was supposed to serve. The more details emerged, the clearer it became. Her time in office was not only divisive, but had deeply damaged the town's financial well-being. The question remained, how would Dalton recover? Meanwhile, another troubling incident unfolded, involving local government. The assessor for Thornton Township, who had served for over a decade helping residents with property tax appeals and exemptions, arrived at work to a disturbing scene. She had been locked out of her own office. Even, more alarming, sensitive documents, previously secured under lock and key, were now scattered across a common area. These records contained taxpayers' personal information, raising serious concerns about transparency and security within local government. When asked about the incident, she pointed to specific supervisors, Taney H. Bryan and Natalie, as individuals who might have knowledge of what had transpired. The mystery deepened, fueling growing unease within the community. Back in Dalton, tensions continued to escalate. The town's trustees, already wary of Henyard's financial mismanagement, refused to approve routine township bills. What had once been a town on the rise was now at the center of a political and financial scandal. Initially celebrated for her bold promises and charisma, Henyard's tenure had become a cautionary tale of unchecked power. The scandal began soon after she was appointed mayor, following the unexpected death of her predecessor, Frank Zucchi. Many had hoped she would bring fresh leadership, but it quickly became apparent that she was recklessly mismanaging the town's finances. Reports surfaced of high-end vacations, designer shopping sprees, and an extravagant security detail that cost more than the entire police department's budget. Meanwhile, Dalton's financial reserves drained at an alarming rate, and the town's debt soared. Henyard, however, remained confident she could sidestep scrutiny. But as unpaid bills piled up and public frustration grew, resistance from the town's trustees intensified. At a recent board meeting, tensions hit a breaking point. Henyard attempted to push through payments from the town's general fund, but the motion failed. Frustrated, she abruptly adjourned the meeting and stormed out, leaving the town's financial future hanging in the balance. With Henyard's legal troubles mounting and federal investigators closing in, the scandal in Dalton was far from over. The full extent of her alleged corruption was still unfolding, and for the town's residents, the road to recovery was just beginning. One morning, the Thornton Township assessor arrived at work only to find that her office door wouldn't open. Upon further inspection, she discovered that boxes of sensitive documents, previously locked away, were now scattered across the common area. These documents contained personal taxpayer information, including names and addresses, and were no longer secure. The breach raised immediate concerns about whether this was an intentional act or a careless mistake. The new supervisor, under whose authority the assessor operated, had no answers, deepening suspicions about potential ties to Tiffany Henyard's chaotic leadership. Henyard, already under growing scrutiny for months, now faced questions about her leadership not just in Dalton, but also in surrounding areas like Thornton Township. Her controversial behavior had fueled a power struggle between her and other members of the township board. When she attempted to push through financial decisions to keep payments on track, she met resistance at every turn. Trustees refused to cooperate, ignored her calls, and left key issues unresolved. Tensions peaked during a board meeting where none of Henyard's proposals were even included on the agenda. The trustees had made their stance clear. They would not support her. As the meeting dragged on with no resolutions, Henyard grew visibly frustrated. Ultimately, it ended in failure, and she stormed out after yet another failed attempt to push her financial agenda forward. Amid this political turmoil, the situation in Dalton took an even darker turn. The FBI launched an investigation, and what initially seemed like a local scandal quickly escalated into something much larger. Dalton, once financially stable with millions in reserve, had plunged into a staggering $3.5 million deficit. Federal agents, armed with subpoenas and relentless determination, began scrutinizing every aspect of the town's finances, from payroll to budgets, credit card statements, and expense reimbursements. As they dug deeper, a troubling picture emerged. Financial mismanagement and potential fraud, with Henyard at the center of it all. Her attempts to downplay the investigation only intensified federal interest. The government expanded its probe into her personal business dealings, including her restaurant and property management companies, as well as her financial ties to Dalton. A second subpoena followed, demanding financial records from the township, including payroll documents, budgets, and expense reports. The investigation wasn't just focused on Henyard. The FBI turned its attention to her inner circle, interviewing witnesses, local business owners, and tracking every dollar that had moved through Dalton's coffers. One key figure under scrutiny was Keith Freeman, who appeared to be closely linked to the questionable financial dealings surrounding Henyard's administration. As the case grew, experts, including former FBI agents, began comparing the unfolding scandal to high-profile political investigations like Watergate, citing its complexity and potential fallout. The deeper the FBI looked, the more damning the evidence became. Investigators uncovered an eye-popping list of extravagant expenses, including Henyard's personal security detail, an operation costing the town more than some countries spend on national defense. What had started as local concerns about reckless spending had now spiraled into a full-blown federal investigation. With the FBI tightening its grip and subpoenas piling up, it was becoming clear. Henyard's unchecked power had finally met an immovable force, and the consequences were closing in fast. Tiffany Henyard, who was supposed to be leading a small town, seemed to view herself as royalty, living in a bubble of luxury while Dalton's residents struggled with mounting financial burdens. As she paraded around with a private security force, the town's police department remained underfunded, unable to address real crime while their mayor lived in a world of excess. Investigations revealed that Henyard's spending extended far beyond her security detail. Among her many extravagant purchases was a notorious $33,000 Amazon shopping spree, where she bought everything from wigs to batteries, all while Dalton sank deeper into financial ruin. Oblivious to the severity of the situation, she continued living lavishly, spending recklessly as the town spiraled toward collapse. Even seasoned investigators were shocked by the sheer depth of her financial excesses, and the town's residents, once hopeful about her leadership, were now growing furious. As the truth came to light, public outcry intensified. Henyard had not only squandered the town's resources, but had also betrayed the trust of the very people she was supposed to serve. The FBI's investigation only deepened the sense of betrayal, leaving many Dalton residents wondering how their once financially stable town had fallen into millions of dollars in debt. The answer seemed clear. Henyard's complete disregard for fiscal responsibility and her obsession with luxury at the taxpayer's expense had driven Dalton to the brink. Determined to hold her accountable, the Dalton Village Board enlisted former Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot, a former federal prosecutor, to dig into Henyard's spending. Lightfoot's reputation for exposing financial mismanagement made her the ideal person to investigate. As she combed through Henyard's credit card statements, travel logs, and expense reports, the full scope of Henyard's extravagance became even more evident. But rather than taking responsibility, Henyard framed the investigation as a political attack, claiming she was being unfairly targeted because of her gender and race. The people of Dalton weren't buying it. At a fiery town hall meeting, residents openly confronted her, demanding accountability and answers. Their frustration boiled over as they watched their tax dollars vanish, while their town deteriorated. Meanwhile, Henyard continued her spending spree, showing no remorse for the financial devastation she had caused. The state of Illinois had seen enough. In response to the ongoing scandal, state officials froze funding to Dalton, a drastic move that underscored just how dire the situation had become. The town, once flush with millions, was now drowning in over $3.5 million of debt. Basic services were at risk, infrastructure was crumbling, and the leadership crisis had left the community fragmented. Henyard, at the center of it all, seemed increasingly unstable, clinging to power as the walls closed in. As the scandal escalated, so did the FBI's investigation. What began as a probe into Henyard's spending quickly expanded to her entire inner circle. Investigators issued subpoenas for payroll records, financial reimbursements, and business dealings, scrutinizing every dollar that had passed through Dalton's coffers. Former FBI agents warned that this was no ordinary corruption case. The depth of financial mismanagement rivaled major political scandals of the past. The revelations continued to pile up. Henyard had spent taxpayer money on designer purses, extravagant vacations, and an absurdly expensive security detail, all while her town crumbled. While Dalton struggled to repair roads and keep essential services running, Henyard insulated herself in luxury, seemingly indifferent to the suffering of the very people she was elected to serve. Even as federal scrutiny mounted, Henyard refused to step down. But the people of Dalton had reached their breaking point. At a recent village council meeting, residents demanded her resignation, calling out her reckless behavior and questioning how she had been allowed to wield so much unchecked power. With every passing day, more of her financial mismanagement came to light, and the FBI's case against her grew stronger. Henyard's empire was crumbling, and her political career was hanging by a thread. The people of Dalton, once hopeful for her leadership, now saw her as the embodiment of political corruption. Their fight for justice had only begun. The fallout from Henyard's actions will haunt Dalton for years. The town now faces the immense challenge of recovering from her reckless spending and restoring public trust. While national politics often dominate headlines, this scandal serves as a stark reminder that local leadership has a direct impact on communities. And when power is abused, the consequences can be devastating. The people of Dalton refuse to back down. They are taking to the streets, demanding answers, and fighting for the future of their town. As the FBI tightens its grip and new details emerge, one thing is clear. Henyard's time as mayor is running out. The people are watching, and they won't rest until justice is served.